This week, a Colorado school district assigning opposite-gender students to share beds on field trips. Parents want their say in court. 23 years after the tragedy of 9/11, how some keep the memory of the tragedy alive. And can the country ever restore a sense of unity like that time again? And a Christian school in Maine takes on their state in court for attempting to ignore the Supreme Court. These stories and plenty more on deck this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capital, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now, let's meet our panel, some of the men and women behind the stories at ReadLion.com. Michael Ryan is the executive editor of The Lion. Adam Wittenberg did such a great job last week, we've got him back as another staff writer at The Lion. Welcome back, Adam. And Valerie Cabana, our media contributor and social media director here at The Lion. Welcome, team, as we jump into the news this week. And Adam, this week is 9/11, 23 years since that fateful day. Your thoughts on a story there at ReadLion.com.
Yes, the story is about the University of Missouri, or Mizzou, how they're having some events today to honor the victims and remember this. And it's certainly good that this is still being remembered 23 years later. But I want to call your attention to another story, which we're going to be putting up on the website. And it's from security expert Robert Greenway. He's a veteran and a security expert. And he says the United States is more vulnerable now than we were in the months or year leading up to 9/11. And he gives 4 reasons. He says our posture abroad, our negative approach to our adversaries, our neglected military, and then our open borders. We've invited terrorist threats and potential enemies into our country domestically.
Michael, there was a time, and those of us who are of a certain age are old enough to remember how we all felt. And there was a genuine sense in that time, in that era, that we were under obviously a grave threat. It was real, and we needed to do everything we could to protect the homeland. That's ebbed quite a bit. What is the sentiment? What is the sense of maybe the international danger the country faces today, do you think, compared to then?
Well, I think Adam presents some pretty important information that we're at more risk than before. I think everybody old enough to remember can remember where they were. I was at the newspaper where I worked and watching the events unfold in the publisher's office, and it was just horrific. But I was tasked with writing 2 editorials for the newspaper while the thing was really going on, one for a special edition that afternoon, one for the next morning. And then, of course, that night, like many people, I went to church, tried to hide my tears from my very small children. But never, Chris, in the days and weeks and months after that, did I ever think that 9/11 would be the end of America. I don't think I can say that the end of America is so far-fetched today. Just look at what's going on. There was a poll last year that said patriotism is important, or very important, to only 38% of adults in America and only 23% of adults under 30. You look at the fact that the U.S. flag triggers people. You look at the fact that we really don't have any borders right now. You look at the fact that the trust in institutions, all institutions almost, has absolutely cratered, as has our civic knowledge and engagement. And you just have to come to the conclusion that perhaps this is a different kind of 9/11 that we're doing to ourselves.
It's an interesting question. Do you believe a 9/11, heaven forbid, something that scale ever occur again? Many believe it could. What would the end result be for the American public? That rally cry again? That moment where George W. Bush throws out the first pitch and everybody's with him in that moment? He's on the bullhorn. Will we ever have that back, or is that a bygone era? Are we too divided, Michael, that would never return again, even in something that tragic again?
Well, God forbid it happen, number one. But number two, I wonder if we could have the same cohesion that we did after 9/11. We are so divided in this country, and the politics have divided us, and the open border has divided us, and there's so many people now in this country that don't really understand how the country works, how we're dependent on each other for making it work. You know, there was a line in Braveheart where in, 1300 Scotland, the character says this country from top to bottom has no sense of itself. I think that's America in 2024.
Moving on to the next story today at readline.com is a story about China and their international adoptions. If anyone has ever followed a story of someone, you've personally known someone who's gone through adoption, you know how expensive and bureaucratic it can be. Many of these children come from places like Russia and China. Valerie, there's another story now that China has decided to stop those adoptions.
Yeah, so China's decided to stop all adoptions from outside of their country. And this is affecting families in the United States in ways that are absolutely heartbreaking because so many of them were actually paired with children before the pandemic hit. And then they were actually weeks away from meeting their children, and then the country shut down. And so they have been in contact, and then even since then, for the past 4 years, still saying like, hey, we are your parents and we are going to adopt you. And so I want to read a quote from a mom who said, "And to think about this little girl, we promised we would come for her. As a 6-year-old, how could you process the reason why we aren't coming when we said that we would?" And I know that when we look at the psychological development of a child, this is traumatizing and it does leave traces of abandonment. And so my heart goes out to those children and those families who are going through this right now. But it also brings a perfect opportunity to talk about adoption reform in America and the kids here that need to be adopted, that are longing for a family. And so I believe that we need adoption reform right here.
Adam, we've been profiling Christian Teachers of the Year. This is on Upnote. This is one of our favorite times of the year because we honor from all over the country some of the best in Christian education. We have another profile of one at readline.com.
Yes, this is about Dr. John McWilliams. He is a science teacher in Arkansas, and he is a believer in Romans 1:20. And the Apostle Paul writes that there's evidence for God in creation. Since the start of creation, you can look at nature and believe that there's a God. People are without excuse for not believing in God. And so this guy takes that and he uses students as young as 4th grade and up. And he says, my first role is get them out there marveling at nature. Parents, take note of this, that kids can learn about God and discover God. They need to get out and play in the dirt. They need to touch bugs and leaves and things. And then he just asks questions, and God just starts to open up his creation to them. And then he also uses that as an on-ramp to faith.
I know a little about the doctor that you profile here, Adam, that you're talking about. And Valerie, I wonder, what do you think about that? As a younger person, let's say the millennial group and younger, Gen Z, is the advent of the social media scene and the screen use, do you think that's, what do you want to say, encumbered people's love of nature and reverence for a creator, do you think? Is that something we need to focus on a little more?
Absolutely not. It has not brought any attention to the creator, only what man has created. And getting out in nature and experiencing that personally has been the best way to connect with our creator and with the Lord and all that he has created. So hats off to John for the way that he is leading his students and how he's teaching them about creation in a way that is the truth.
Yeah, he's an impressive guy. I'd encourage the story at readline.com. Adam, you're also working on a story, or you have been, at the website about Maine. The state of Maine is an interesting one we don't hear a lot about, but when we're talking about school choice, but there's actually a school going to battle with the state.
Yeah, it's a very unfortunate battle because the state of Maine had been prohibiting this school and other Christian or religious schools from receiving state money through a legitimate school choice program in the state. And in 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court said, you can't do that anymore, Maine. They have a right to their religion and free speech, and they have a right to those funds like anyone else. Well, Maine didn't like that. I'm going to read a quote from the Attorney General of Maine, who, after the decision was rendered by the U.S. Supreme Court, said this. He said, Christian school beliefs are fundamentally at odds with the values we hold dear. They promote a single religion to the exclusion of all others, refuse to admit gay and transgender children, and openly discriminate in hiring teachers and staff. And And get this, they even one school teaches children that the husband is to be the leader of the household.
Oh, no.
And so, so Christians being Christians are teaching basic Christian doctrines and adhering to the beliefs and morals and values that Christians have always held is a threat to the state. And then he said, I and the governor are going to find a way to stop, make sure that public money is not used to promote discrimination, intolerance, and bigotry. And they did. They put in a little loophole in the law that now this Christian school is challenging because they are insistent on not letting any money go toward Christian schools, even though the Supreme Court said it should.
You know, one of the things we cover, obviously, a lot here at readline.com and at the Herzog Foundation is the subject of school choice and advancing Christian education specifically. And I'll only ask about the presidential debate this week in that capacity, guys, and I'll go around the horn and get your thoughts. Michael, are you surprised that the subject of school choice, and education on either side didn't come up and the moderators didn't ask it? Is that waning as an important issue to Americans or just didn't make the docket this week?
Oh, I think it's absolutely a function of the moderators. I mean, it's not an issue to them, and it's not an issue to one candidate. It is an issue to the other, and he didn't have a chance to bring it up. But there were a number of issues that are important to everyday Americans that weren't brought up, such as Title IX, so-called reform, forcing girls and women's teams to include biological males, all kinds of things that weren't brought up last night.
Valerie, there's, as Michael says, there are many things that weren't mentioned. Those two in particular, given I know we've recently profiled Riley Gaines, who's obviously one of the biggest spokespeople, the Title IX bus tour all over the country. Surprised that those topics didn't come up?
I'm not surprised because it's all a part of the agenda. But what happens within education over the next 4 years is going to be crucial to American society for the rest of my lifetime. And so it is an important issue, and I am upset that it didn't come up. And on the basis of Title IX, we know number 17 on Trump's agenda is to keep men out of women's sports. And that's extremely important for the sake of women. And if you want to say that you're pro-woman, then you need to keep men out of women's sports.
Seems pretty simple. Adam, your thoughts? School choice not coming up. And by the way, even if you are pro-school unions, as we know many active political participants like Randy Weingarten are, odd that Kamala Harris wouldn't bring that up. Education was not discussed, period, by anyone on that stage last night.
That's right. And I do think it's part of an agenda to limit the discussion. And let's face it, education and a lot of these stories that we cover, they affect the vast majority of Americans every day. Sending kids to school, men playing in women's sports, the transgender ideology and all these things. This touches almost everyone in America in some way, directly or indirectly. And it was very sad to me, although not shocking, that it was not brought up.
And Chris, Riley Gaines suggested beforehand on X that the candidates be asked to define a woman. I think that would have been fun to see.
And then, of course, when you consider that we had one president nearly killed and within a month another president removed from the ballot and his vice president installed, those topics also didn't come up. I mean, major issues didn't come up. But anyway, that's for another show. Michael, we close out today our final story. I'm not even sure where this is going, to be honest. I haven't read it all, which is why I'm going to lean on you. What is going on in Colorado with a set of parents suing their district?
Well, I'll try not to lean on my own understanding, Chris. 3 Colorado families are suing Jefferson County School District in Colorado for their children being roomed on overnight trips with transgender folks of the opposite sex and hiding it from the parents. And this included one 11-year-old girl. Time was, when there were chaperones on such trips, and now they're being forced together and without the parents' knowledge. Our teacher of the year basically said that if the schools aren't teaching your values, get them out. And increasingly, public schools are teaching worldviews that aren't consistent with Christian values.
I'm trying to remember back to my school years, Valerie, of going on field trips, if there were overnight trips, maybe for tournaments or things like that. I'm trying to imagine a scenario where I would be assigned sleeping quarters with a biological girl, even if she claimed she was a male. It's almost unthinkable.
Yeah, and here the boys that are involved, they're young. They're not even to the point to where they like girls yet. And now there's a girl who's in their room with them. So the boys got together and they said, "Hey, we're not going to shower. We're not going to undress because we are actually uncomfortable." And I think that's just really sad. The counselor was required to supervise the boys during this time, and this one particularly was a girl. There was also a boy who was assigned to sleep in a bed with a girl because he identified as transgender. And if I was on, the only time we did overnights was on sports trips. So if I was assigned to have a man in my room, I would have found somewhere else to sleep. I would have gone to sleep on the street or something because I'm not doing it.
I tell you, I have a one daughter in high school. That's it. My 2 boys out and 1 to go, and she's in a great Christian school, and I'm just holding my breath to get through this madness so that I have to just report it and not actually live it. Heaven forbid. Let's go around the horn and talk about our favorite articles of the week. That's how we always like to wrap up the show. Adam, we start with you. Your favorite at readline.com.
Yeah, I would have to say the Maine story, believe it or not, because it just reveals the extent to which folks in government, in positions of power, have this anti-Christian, not just, hey, you do you and we'll do us, which is kind of how a lot of these folks claim to be, but actually downright intolerance or hatred and going to whatever degree they could to keep the money from the school that had already won a Supreme Court battle. And that's just really low.
Valerie, your favorite this week?
We're going to stay happy. We're going to stay Christian education. We're going to go with Dr. John McWilliams, Herzog Foundation Teacher of the Year. He's been teaching for over 40 years, has incredible experience, and I really encourage you to go read his story and how he uses nature to help his students connect with God, because as a Christian, as a believer, for over a decade, I fully believe in the power of nature.
Michael, what do you like this week?
Well, just to piggyback on what Adam said, that case in Maine has another special resonance in that we're ignoring a Supreme Court ruling, and that seems to be going around with the Biden administration ignoring Supreme Court rulings on student loan debt. But my favorite was Pennsylvania Dad to School Board. Don't put our kids on the front lines of gender debate. This is a story in which a father pulled his son out of kindergarten because of a non-binary teacher that he says violates his family's religious beliefs.
What a time. And for those of us that value journalism, it's hard to find, but not at readlion.com. Panel, thank you, and I hope that you will always check out readlion.com for all the very latest news each and every day. Breaking commentary and news and reports at readlion.com. Until next time, for all of us at The Lion, thanks for downloading the show, and we'll see you again soon.